There comes a point in every person's life when the weight they carry begins to crush them. Not because life is too heavy, but because they're trying to carry what was never theirs to begin with. Some of us have spent years trying to manage every outcome, fix every broken thing, and direct every path as if we were the authors of life itself. We pray to God, yet we live like we are Him, worried, anxious, restless, always trying to control what only He can handle. The truth is simple, but it's hard to swallow. Control is an illusion. You can't control what people think of you. You can't control the timing of your breakthrough. You can't control the storms that come into your life, the setbacks or the betrayals. You can't control who stays or who walks away. And the more you try, the more exhausted you become because you're fighting battles that belong to God. We live in a culture that glorifies control. Control your image, control your finances, control your future. But spiritual peace doesn't come from control. It comes from surrender. Peace begins the moment you stop trying to play God in your own story. It begins when you finally say, God, I don't know how this will work out, but I trust that you do. You see, when you insist on controlling everything, you actually limit what God can do through you. Control keeps your hands full. Faith requires empty hands. Control clings. Faith releases. Control worries. Faith rests. The more you grip your plans, the less room you leave for God to move. But when you open your hands, when you release your need to manage every outcome, you'll discover that God was already working behind the scenes, aligning things far beyond your understanding. Some of the greatest disappointments in your life are not punishments, they're protections. You wanted it to work out your way, but God said, if you only knew what I knew, you'd thank me for saying no. That's why trust is not believing that everything will go the way you planned. It's believing that even when it doesn't, God still has a plan. Think about it. When you try to control everything, you rob yourself of rest. You wake up thinking about what you can fix, and you go to bed replaying what went wrong. But when you surrender it to God, you start to experience a peace that doesn't make sense. A peace that says, I don't understand it, but I know He's got it. That's real freedom. Some of you have been holding on too tightly to a relationship, to a dream, to a fear, to a timeline. You've been telling God, I trust you, while quietly still trying to steer the wheel. Maybe it's time to unclench your fists and say, God, you drive. I'm done trying to control the road you already built. Because here's the thing, when you let go, you don't lose control. You gain clarity. You begin to see that what you thought was falling apart was actually falling into place. You begin to notice how every delay had purpose, every delay had purpose, every detour had direction, and every unanswered prayer was making room for something better. So today, let this be your turning point. Stop trying to manipulate outcomes. Stop trying to fix what only God can. Stop trying to control people who were never yours to control. Do your part. Be faithful. Work hard. Make wise choices. But after that, let God be God. You don't need to understand everything to trust His timing. You don't need to see the whole picture to know He's painting something beautiful. You just need to rest. Truly rest in the truth that He's in control and He's never once dropped what belongs to Him. Let go of the illusion of control. Peace begins where surrender starts. Most of us spend our lives holding on too tightly to things we were never meant to hold. We grip our plans, our expectations, our relationships, and our futures as if our security depends on keeping everything in perfect order. But life doesn't work that way, and deep down, we know it. The more we try to control, the more anxious we become. The more we demand certainty, the more unstable our hearts feel. We were never designed to manage the universe, yet we live every day as if we must. The illusion of control promises safety, but it only delivers stress. It whispers that if we just plan better, work harder, and think smarter, we can make everything go our way. But peace doesn't come from perfect planning. Peace comes from trusting the one who already knows the plan. When we try to control everything, what we're really saying is that we don't trust God enough to handle it. We say with our lips that we believe He's in control, but our behavior often says the opposite. We worry, we micromanage, we panic when life shifts direction, and we think that if we don't hold everything together, it will all fall apart. Yet, if we're honest, the times we've tried to hold everything together were the times we fell apart the most. Because control and peace cannot live in the same heart. One must go for the other to stay. You can't hold on and let go at the same time. You can't surrender and control at once. You have to make a choice. The illusion of control begins early in life. We're taught that success means being in charge, making things happen, and never letting life surprise us. But God's way is often different. He allows the unexpected. He invites the uncertain, and He uses the unknown to shape our faith. When you think about it, every moment of growth in your life probably came when something didn't go your way. Every time you matured, it was because something forced you to depend on something greater than yourself. Control keeps you in a small box where everything feels familiar, but nothing ever grows. Surrender opens that box and allows your faith to breathe. Letting go of control doesn't mean giving up responsibility. It means recognizing limits. It means doing your best and then stepping aside, allowing God to do what only He can. There's a difference between diligence and dominance. You're called to be diligent in effort, but humble in outcome. You're called to sow the seeds, but you're not in charge of the harvest. You're called to take the steps, but you're not the one who parts the sea. When you let go, you don't lose control. You simply return it to its rightful owner. Peace begins where surrender starts because surrender is an act of trust. It's saying, oh God, I don't understand what you're doing, but I believe you know what you're doing. It's the realization that peace is not found in having all the answers, but in knowing the one who does. Surrender doesn't mean passivity. It means confidence. It means you no longer have to fight for control because you're confident that God already has it under control. That kind of peace is unshakable. It's the kind that doesn't break when the plan breaks. It's the kind that stays steady even when everything around you is shaking. When life becomes overwhelming, our instinct is to grab tighter. We think if we just hold on a little more firmly, we can fix it. But that's the trap. The tighter you hold, the more pressure you feel. The more pressure you feel, the less peace you have. You can't receive peace with clenched fists. You have to open your hands. You have to let go. Some of us are praying for peace while still holding on to control. We're asking God to calm the storm while we're still steering the ship. But peace doesn't enter until control exits. Control exits. You can't make room for peace if your heart is full of anxiety and your mind is full of plans that God never approved. There is a quiet power in surrender. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the understanding that God sees what you can't, knows what you don't, and controls what you can't reach. It's realizing that your attempts to manage everything are actually standing in the way of the miracle you're praying for. Sometimes God doesn't move because you won't move out of the way. He's waiting for you to release what you've been holding so tightly so that He can take it and turn it into something greater. When you surrender, you give Him permission to lead. And when He leads, peace follows. Think about the areas in your life where you've been striving for control. Maybe it's your finances, your relationships, your career, or your future. Maybe you've been trying to force outcomes, manipulate timing, or make people change. Ask yourself if all that control has actually brought peace. Most likely it hasn't. It has probably left you drained, anxious, and restless. You can't control the wind, but you can adjust your sail. You can't control what happens, but you can choose to rest in the one who does. Peace doesn't mean everything is perfect. It means you've stopped fighting what you can't fix. The path to peace is paved with surrender. The more you release, the lighter you feel. The more you trust, the stronger your faith grows. You'll start to notice that peace doesn't come from having less chaos. It comes from knowing who's in charge of the chaos. The storms may not stop, but your heart learns to rest in the middle of them. Control says, I must handle this. Surrender says, God's already handling this. That's where peace begins. Not in control, but in letting go. Not in fighting harder, but in trusting deeper. Not in knowing every step, but in knowing the one who directs them. You can't carry what was never meant to be yours. Release it to God. So much of our stress, anxiety, and exhaustion doesn't come from what life gives us, but from what we insist on carrying. We pick up burdens that were never assigned to us, responsibilities that don't belong to us, and emotions that were never ours to hold. We try to fix people who don't want to change, carry guilt that God has already forgiven, and control outcomes that only heaven can decide. It's no wonder so many people feel weighed down. We're carrying the weight of the world when all we were asked to carry was faith. Life becomes lighter when you learn to set down what was never meant for your hands. There are some things that belong only to God: timing, destiny, justice, healing, hearts, and outcomes. Yet we act as if all of that depends on us. We lose sleep worrying about what the future holds, trying to figure out how everything will work, and replaying the past to see what we could have done differently. But the truth is, there are mysteries we're not meant to solve. There are outcomes we're not meant to orchestrate. God never asked you to be the burden bearer. He asked you to be the believer. The moment you take on his role, the weight becomes too heavy because it was never designed for your shoulders. Carrying what isn't yours always leads to fatigue. You might not feel it right away, but over time, your spirit begins to wear down. You start losing joy. You stop smiling, and your prayers turn into complaints. It's not because God isn't good. It's because you're trying to do his job. There's a limit to human strength, and when you reach it, that's usually God's cue to remind you that the load you're dragging was never meant to be yours. When you release it, peace flows in. When you hold it, stress takes over. Sometimes we carry pain that's too old to heal by human means. We hold on to resentment, betrayal, or disappointment from years ago as if carrying it somehow keeps us in control. But all it does is chain us to the past. Letting go doesn't mean what happened was right. It means you're choosing to stop letting it define you. The past is too heavy for the present to carry. Every moment you hold on to what hurt you, you lose space for what could heal you. God can only fill what you empty. If your heart is full of the weight of yesterday, how can he pour new strength into you today? We also carry people, their expectations, opinions, and decisions. We carry the pressure to please everyone, to be perfect, to never disappoint. But you were never meant to be everyone's answer. You can love people deeply without carrying their burdens as your own. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is release them into God's hands. You can't change anyone's heart. You can't force someone to understand your worth. You can't heal someone who's not ready to be healed. Only God can. Your job is to love them, pray for them, and trust God to do the rest. When you stop trying to play Savior, you finally discover what peace feels like. Carrying things that aren't yours also shows up in the way we handle our dreams. We try to make every detail happen exactly as we imagined it, and when it doesn't, we panic. But purpose doesn't need pressure. It needs patience. God's plans aren't delayed because you can't control them. They're developing because he's still preparing you. When you try to carry your own calling, it becomes a burden. But when you let God carry it, it becomes a blessing. The door that he opens won't require you to exhaust yourself to keep it open. The dream he builds will stand on grace, not on your effort. Every day we face a choice: carry it or cast it. The difference between anxiety and peace often depends on that single choice. Anxiety grows when you carry things you can't control. Peace grows when you hand them over to God. Casting your cares on him isn't a one-time action. It's a daily practice. It's waking up and saying to God, this is too heavy for me, but not for you. It's learning to breathe again when life feels suffocating because you finally stop clutching what's breaking you. Even Jesus spoke about this kind of release when he said, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. That invitation isn't poetic, it's practical. It's a reminder that your soul was never designed to live under constant pressure. The same God who formed the stars never meant for his children to walk through life crushed by the weight of worry. You're not supposed to carry it all. You're supposed to carry it to him. Think about the things that keep you up at night. The bills you can't pay yet. The future you can't predict. The person you can't fix. The outcome you can't guarantee. Ask yourself honestly, what has worrying about them ever changed? Nothing. It only drains you. But when you release them, something shifts inside you. The problem might not disappear, but the weight does. You start to realize that peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of trust. Letting go is not a sign of weakness. It's a declaration of faith. It's saying to God, I can't, but I know you can. It's admitting that your strength has a limit, but his doesn't. You don't have to understand how he'll work it out. You have to believe that he will. You don't have to hold it all together. You just have to hold on to him. When you finally release what isn't yours to carry, you make space for God to move, to heal, to restore, and to lead you into the kind of peace you've been longing for all along. Control limits God's power. Faith creates space for his miracles. One of the greatest barriers to seeing God move in your life is the desire to manage how he does it. We like to think that if we just plan carefully enough, pray specifically enough, or work hard enough, we can determine exactly when, how, and through whom God will act. But real faith doesn't work that way. Faith doesn't demand a blueprint. It trusts the builder. Every time you insist on controlling the outcome, you're unintentionally telling God, I don't believe you'll get it right unless I help. And that's where many of us struggle. We believe in God's power, but we still feel the need to manage it. We ask him for help, then immediately start drafting our own rescue plan, just in case he takes too long. When you live like that, you limit what God can do because you're only giving him permission to work within the boundaries of your understanding. But God doesn't fit inside your plans. His miracles rarely make sense in the moment. He parts seas when it seems impossible. He brings water from a rock when it seems absurd. He uses broken people to fulfill perfect plans. If you could predict or control everything he does, it wouldn't be called faith. It would be calculation. And God's work is never confined to human calculation. The problem with control is that it builds walls where God wants to build doors. You can't invite the supernatural while clinging to the predictable. Control demands logic. Faith embraces mystery. Control insists on comfort. Faith thrives in uncertainty. Control seeks to understand first. Faith chooses to trust first. The tension between control and faith is where your growth happens. If you always stay in control, you'll only experience what your strength can accomplish. But if you surrender control, you'll begin to experience what only God's strength can accomplish. Think about the moments in your life when you tried to make things happen in your own power. Maybe you pushed a relationship that wasn't meant to work or forced an opportunity that wasn't aligned with your calling. You might have gotten short-term results, but you probably also felt long-term emptiness. That's because anything built outside of faith requires constant effort to sustain. What you start in control, you'll have to maintain in control. But what you start in faith, God sustains with grace. Control is exhausting. Faith is freeing. Control drains, faith restores. God's power moves most clearly in the spaces where you stop striving. It's not that he needs your permission to act, but he often waits for your surrender because miracles flourish in surrendered soil. The moment you let go of your own timeline and your own methods, you open up room for him to surprise you. Sometimes he delays something not because he's forgotten you, but because you're still too focused on controlling the process. Faith says, God, I don't care how you do it. I just believe you will. Control says, God, I need you to do it my way, in my time, and through my plan. The first posture invites miracles. The second repels them. We often say we want to see God's power, but deep down, we want him to work according to our comfort. We want miracles without mystery, answers without patience, blessings without surrender. But God's power doesn't show up in the spaces we control. It shows up in the spaces we release. The widow who poured out her last bit of oil didn't experience the miracle until she emptied what little she had. The fishermen who obeyed Jesus and cast their nets again didn't see the abundance until they stopped relying on their own experience. The faith to release control is the doorway to God's demonstration. When you give up your way, he begins to make a way. Control also keeps your perspective small. You can only see what's right in front of you, but God sees the entire picture. You may think a delay means denial, but from his point of view, it's direction. You may think something is falling apart, when in fact, he's rearranging it for something greater. When you control, you operate by sight. When you believe, you operate by vision. And the two are not the same. Sight focuses on what is. Vision focuses on what can be. Control confines you to what's visible. Faith connects you to what's possible. Another subtle way control limits God's power is by making you dependent on yourself. You start to think your effort is what keeps everything together. You begin to believe that if you stop managing every detail, everything will collapse. But that mindset robs you of the peace that comes from resting in divine strength. Faith is not lazy. It's trusting. It means you still work, but you work from peace, not pressure. You still plan, but you let God have the final edit. You still dream, but you allow him to decide the timing. The moment you let go of your grip, your life becomes lighter and God's hand becomes more visible. There's a quiet miracle in every moment you choose faith over control. It might not always look spectacular on the outside, but it's transformational on the inside. The miracle of peace, the miracle of trust, the miracle of strength when you should have broken. These are all signs of God's power at work in surrendered lives. The same hands that created the universe are more than capable of holding your future. But he won't pry control from your hands. He waits until you willingly place it in his. The more you let faith lead, the more miracles become natural. You stop needing constant proof because you've already seen his faithfulness. You stop panicking in uncertainty because you've experienced his consistency. You stop chasing control because you've learned that what God builds through faith is always stronger than what you can build through force. Faith doesn't just create space for his miracles, it becomes the miracle itself. It's the evidence that even when you can't see how, you still believe he can. And that belief opens doors no amount of control ever could. Trust God's timing. His no is often protection, not rejection. Not rejection. There are moments in life when everything seems to be delayed. When doors don't open no matter how hard you knock, when prayers echo back in silence, and when the things you hoped for slip through your fingers. It's in those moments that doubt begins to whisper, telling you that maybe God forgot, maybe he doesn't care, or maybe you weren't worthy of the answer you wanted. But the truth is, God's delays are never denials. Every no, every not yet, every pause is laced with purpose. He sees the entire picture while you only see a fragment. What feels like rejection is often his way of saving you from something that would have destroyed your peace, your purpose, or your faith. We live in a world addicted to instant gratification. We want everything now, fast results, fast answers, fast success. But God operates on eternal timing, not earthly schedules. What seems slow to you is often strategic to him. There are lessons that can only be learned in the waiting. There are strengths that can only be developed through delay. If you got everything you wanted when you wanted it, your character would never have the chance to grow strong enough to sustain it. Timing isn't just about receiving the blessing, it's about becoming the person who can handle it. When God says a no, it's not because he's cruel. It's because he's kind enough to protect you from premature blessings. A door that opens too early can lead to disaster. A relationship granted too soon can derail your destiny. A dream fulfilled before you're ready can crush you under its weight. God's timing is like the rhythm of a song. If you rush the beat, the melody breaks. When you trust His timing, you allow your life to unfold in harmony with His wisdom. Sometimes God's no is simply a redirection. You think you're being denied when you're actually being guided. Freedom also means learning to accept that not everything will make sense right now. There will be seasons when God's plan feels like silence, when nothing seems to move, and when your prayers feel unanswered. In those moments, your faith is not wasted, it's being refined. The same God who led you into that season knows exactly when and how to lead you out. When you trust that, you can rest without forcing outcomes. You can stop measuring your worth by what works and start measuring it by who you're becoming. Resting in His plan also frees you from comparison. When you're busy managing outcomes, you start comparing your progress to everyone else's. You see their breakthroughs and wonder why yours hasn't come. But when you rest, you remember that your journey has a different rhythm. You stop competing and start growing. You realize that the timing of your life is sacred. It's handcrafted by God, not defined by others. What's meant for you will not pass you by, and what's not meant for you won't stay, no matter how much you try to manage it. Widow, this kind of freedom feels like breathing again after years of holding your breath. It's the release of control, the loosening of worry, the quiet trust that says, I don't need to understand to be at peace. You stop needing to chase what's uncertain because you start resting in what's unshakable. God's plan is not fragile, and His timing is not random. The same hands that hold the stars in place are holding your story together with precision and care. You don't have to keep trying to hold everything together when He already is. When you finally stop managing outcomes and start resting in His plan, something miraculous happens. The weight lifts. The anxiety fades. The constant mental noise quiets. You begin to live lighter, freer, calmer. You wake up without the urge to control the day and instead learn to flow with it. You realize that freedom was never about getting everything you wanted. It was about trusting the one who knows what's best. You discover that the peace you were chasing was never waiting at the end of your plans. It was waiting at the center of your surrender.